Due to the fact that I am overweight and use a wheelchair, my parents did not include me in the ideal family Christmas photo in their collection. Therefore, I informed my grandmother, who subsequently altered her will, and my parents went into a panic. Nathan, who is 15 years old, is my younger brother, and I have always had the impression that my parents look up to him more than they do to me. I am 17 years old. Nathan is a member of our family, despite the fact that he was adopted by my parents almost 9 years ago. In point of fact, I would even go so far as to say that he appears to be more of a member of my family and more of the kind of child that my parents ought to have by comparison to myself. Not because I want to, but because I am saying this. However, despite the fact that my parents have made jokes about this topic on multiple occasions, I got the impression that they are not joking about it at all. I'm not even kidding when I say that my family is so conventionally attractive that they could be featured on the cover of some family magazine. I am really sorry to say that I do not truly belong here. The fact that I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes when I was a child made it extremely challenging for me to take steps toward losing weight. I used to have to eat in secret because it felt like my parents were starving me. My parents tried to regulate my portions and they rigorously monitored everything that I ingested. However, this is not a healthy way to live, and I had to eat in secret because it was such a difficult situation. Because of my inconsistent eating habits, it became impossible for me to lose weight, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm fairly overweight today. It was already very tough for me to maintain a healthy weight, and it became even more difficult for me to lose weight. And then, about 6 months ago, I was unfortunate enough to receive a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. For the past 3 months, I have been compelled to use a wheelchair on an intermittent basis due to the severity of the symptoms. I have experienced flare-ups quite frequently, but I do not really know what the cause of that is yet, so I am unable to even prevent that from occurring. My life had already been very challenging for me earlier on due to the fact that I had been an introverted child, and even at home, the way I was treated was not exactly on par with what I anticipated. Nevertheless, things have taken a turn for the worst since I was diagnosed with the condition. When I was younger, I was simply overweight, however, now I am the obese child who uses a wheelchair. Despite the fact that I was having mental difficulties, my parents did not take any action to assist me in improving my circumstances. Instead of making things easier for me, they started making things even more difficult for me, because it was very obvious from their actions that they viewed me to be a burden on their family. So I just started restricting myself to my room as much as I could because I really did not want to bother them, and it is incredibly lonely. But I can't help it. I really don't want to feel like I'm constantly disappointing everyone around me. I always kept feeling like they didn't really want me as part of their family, but I would deal with it by shaking these thoughts off. That being said, the occurrence that took place a few weeks ago made it somewhat more challenging to just carry out the aforementioned action. My parents were talking about the Christmas postcard that we send out to the rest of the family every year. The next day, just like I do every year, I got dressed in a red outfit and went to the living room so that I could be a part of the family image. This happened almost 3 weeks ago. I had assumed that even if everything had changed, at least this would remain constant. And I would still continue to feel like a part of my own, but they took that away from me as well. It has been a ritual for years, and I thought that everything would change, but at least this would remain constant. As soon as they spotted me, they became really uncomfortable and stated that they had been thinking that perhaps this time it would only be the 3 of them because I was in a wheelchair on that particular day, and they did not want to ruin their photograph. Despite the fact that I was taken aback by the fact that they would even say something like that, I attempted to negotiate with them. In spite of the fact that I stated that I would make an effort to stand for a few photographs, and that it wouldn't be all that difficult for me to do so, they insisted that I should remain seated in the wheelchair and simply let them to take the photographs. As a result, it became very clear to me that they did not want me to be a part of the image in any case, to use the phrase in its most literal understanding. After that, I went back to my room and put myself to sleep by crying loudly. The worst part was that nobody even took the time to come by and see how I was doing. It was a terrible day that was happening toward the conclusion of a terrible year, and I just couldn't take it anymore. On that particular day, I finally made the decision to call my grandma and share with her all that had been going on. In addition to being a beautiful lady, my grandma is also the mother of my father. The passing of my grandfather occurred while my father was just 10 years old, and ever since then, she has constructed a life for herself with no prior experience. In addition to being extremely powerful and motivational, she loves me more than anyone else in the world. I would have moved in with her, but I was really on the fence about the possibility that my parents would eventually change their ways and treat me better. I was holding out hope that they would. On the other hand, I came to the realization that it was never going to take place. It's due to the fact that my grandmother was aware of the fact that my parents did not exactly treat me well. She had invited me on multiple occasions to move in with her if I desired to do so. On that particular day, I informed her that I was truly interested in leaving. My desire to leave this place and move in with her was fueled by the realization that I was not desired in this location. Despite the fact that I had known it for a very long time, I continued to struggle with myself, trying not to accept it since, at the end of the day, they were still my parents, and this was going to be my family. On the other hand, if this were my family, I certainly would have been better off without one. During that particular day, she was the one who was there for me. Over the phone, she soothed me and reassured me while I continued to cry. She helped me feel better. Additionally, she informed me that she would be there in a couple of days, as soon as she returned from her trip with her friends, and that she would then whisk me away with her. She said that she would be there. It's true that my grandmother leads a hip and exciting existence. To put it another way, I made her swear that she would take me away, and after that I refrained from telling my parents anything about it since I had come to the conclusion that it was not worth it. The fact that they did not include me in the photograph was something that they did not even try to apologize for after that particular occurrence. Together with them, I pretended that everything was going according to plan, due to the fact that I was aware that I will be rescued from this location in a short amount of time. In addition, my grandmother kept her promise and visited us at our home the week before last. Over the course of 7 whole days, I had seldom communicated with either my parents or Nathan, nothing more than going to school, returning home, and then remaining in my room for the remainder of the day was all that I did. Nevertheless, on the day when my grandmother came to visit, I was the one who opened the door for her and invited her to come inside. Due to the fact that my parents were completely unaware of what was going to take place, they appeared to be not overly concerned about having her around and were acting as if everything was as it should be. However, my grandmother was not going to have any of it. Consequently, as soon as she was seated, she insisted on knowing the reason behind why I had not been included in the Christmas postcard. The postcards had not even been sent out yet, so my parents were really perplexed as to how she had discovered the information. However, they eventually realized that I must have informed her about the incident, and rather than expressing regret for it, they turned to me and rolled their eyes at me, stating that I had no reason to make a big deal out of it, and they complained to my grandmother about it. They provided the same argument once more, which was that they did not want to inconvenience me by having me stand up for the picture, and that they believed that if I had my wheelchair in the image, it would ruin the portrait. I hadn't said anything up until that time, but then I took advantage of the chance to point out that I had told them that I was okay with standing up for a few minutes, but they were the ones who had refused, which obviously meant that they did not want to be a part of the photo to begin with. Despite the fact that it was not even my fault, I brought up the fact that they had always treated me as if I were an outsider in my family since I did not fit in with them. Despite the fact that Nathan was adopted, they treated him more like someone who was genuinely their flesh and blood as opposed to me. I informed them that it was ironic that they continued to treat him in such a manner. Despite the fact that Nathan and I had a tight relationship when we were younger, they just considered me to be a weight on their shoulders. Following his observation of the manner in which our parents dealt with me, he made the decision to put some distance between himself and me. As a result, I was left with no one in this household when everything was said and done. At least Nathan had the good sense to turn his head away from what I was saying since he was aware that everything I was saying was accurate. My mother and father were immediately upset with me for claiming that Nathan was adopted, as if he was unaware of the fact. Due to the fact that he was only 6 years old when he joined our family, it is evident that he was aware of it. Despite the fact that he was not my biological brother, I had never considered him to be less of a brother than I consider myself to be. Nevertheless, my thesis remained valid, which was that he was always given the care that I did not receive, since he appeared to be wearing the part. But I did not feel like the child of my parents. As a result of the manner in which I was being treated, I may have begun to feel a little amount of resentment toward each and every one of them. Even at that time, my parents did not take the chance to apologize or even act as if they were sorry. Instead, they simply stated that I was acting spoiled and that I was being cruel by bringing up the fact that Nathan was adopted in order to justify my actions. Not only that, but they went on to imply that they anticipated an apology from me at this point. As I was going to continue my argument, I realized that my grandmother had already had enough of it by that time. She stepped in and stated that there was no requirement for such to take place. The reason she was present was to ensure that another instance of mistreatment of this nature would never occur again. She told them that she was taking me off their hands since they had never bothered to hide the fact that they considered me to be a burden on the family. She said this because they appeared to be unaware of what she was saying. After a couple of months, I would turn 18 years old, so there was no real need to worry about custody or anything else at that point. It would be quite acceptable for me to move in with her if I ever decided to do so. My parents were stunned for a few minutes, and nobody spoke up. However, after that, they stated that if my grandma truly desired to take me with her, then she was free to do so, and they were not going to prevent me from doing so. None of them even attempted to put up a fight. In addition, it demonstrated that all of my hypotheses were correct. They were not interested in having me become a member of the family. In the event that I were to leave, my parents and Nathan would be the only members of the family, and they would finally be able to have the picture-perfect family that they have always desired. I was under the impression that we were going to leave right away when my parents told me that they were okay with my grandma taking me away. However, my grandmother simply smiled and stated that they had behaved exactly as she had anticipated they would, and then she brought out some documents. She told my parents that she was forcing them out of her will, and that she should have done this a long time ago. She also added that she should have done this all along. As of this moment, after she had passed away, all that she owned will be transferred to Nathan and me. At first, I was unaware of the consequences of this situation nevertheless. I believe that my parents were aware of it since they instantly went into defense mode and stated that it was extremely unjust for her to treat them in such a manner simply due to the fact that I was a spoiled child and a person who felt entitled to things. I guess I hadn't really given it much thought, but my grandma is rather affluent. Prior to her retirement a few years ago, she was one of the most successful real estate salespeople in the country. Therefore, it would make perfect sense for her to have a lot of money. But I hadn't really given it much attention previously because I love my grandmother for who she is, not because of the amount of money she has, in contrast to my parents. Therefore, she proceeded to inform my parents that she would not be leaving anything to them, and she even presented them with the necessary documentation to support her claim. They began crying and expressing their disapproval, stating that she was being impolite and that she just could not treat them in such a manner. My grandmother, on the other hand, did not care at all. She just instructed me to return to my room, get everything that I required, and then accompany her. Because I had a week to be ready for this, I was fortunate enough to have kept everything packed. And the only thing I needed to do was drag everything out of its places. In spite of the fact that I was doing that, my parents continued to beg and barter with my grandma, but she simply disregarded them despite their repeated efforts. Nothing was spoken by Nathan at any point. His only activity was to sit quietly in a corner of the room, attempting to vanish from the space itself. During the time that I was going, he was the only person who made an effort to bid me farewell. My parents were so preoccupied with trying to resolve a disagreement with my grandmother that they failed to realize that I was also leaving. In a short amount of time, we were able to leave, and ever since then, I have been residing with my grandmother. My school is located a lot closer to her residence, which means that I am able to sleep in for a much longer period of time. This is because I do not have to get up early to catch the bus, and I can simply stroll to school. For some reason, I got the impression that I ought to have made the decision to move in with her earlier than I did, but at least it is better late than never. Since I left, my parents have not made any effort to get in touch with me, but Nathan sent me a text message not long after I left. Despite the fact that he acknowledged the fact that I had never been cruel to him, he had actually distanced himself from me. Perhaps without even realizing it, he had let the manner in which our parents had treated me to influence his behavior toward me as well. Before I brought it up, he had no idea about it at all, but now that he was aware of it, he wanted to apologize to me in order to make amends for his previous actions. He stated that he was extremely thankful for this family since, if it weren't for us, he most likely would have remained with his birth parents and had a lot more difficult existence. He expressed his gratitude by saying that he was truly and fully grateful for this family. He was grateful not only to my parents for adopting him, but also to me for always treating him like my own brother and to my grandma as well. He wanted to express his gratitude to all of these people. Nathan shared with me that he desired to begin our relationship with a clean slate, and as a result, we have been spending time together at school in order to work on repairing our connection. Since he turned 13, he had been extremely aloof from me, but now I feel like I'm slowly going back to the old Nathan, who used to put me on a pedestal. It's been a bit strange for the past couple of years, but it's been a bit strange. Nevertheless, that is not the point of this discussion, rather. It is the fact that he made a remark to me in passing the day before while we were hanging out together that has really stuck with me. Couldn't help but inquire about what was going on at home because I couldn't help but be curious about what my parents were making plans for themselves. Nathan informed me that the situation at home was not looking very good since, as far as I could tell, the blame game between my parents had already begun. My mother was pointing the finger of blame at my father for the fact that he had alienated me throughout my entire childhood, and even for the situation that occurred the other day, because it appeared that he had been the one who considered leaving me out of the picture. The majority of the time, it was my mother who would overreact, and it seemed as though having me as a child was the most difficult job in the world for her. My father blamed her for making me feel like I was a burden because she was the one who was responsible for my feelings. Despite the fact that Nathan addressed it to me in a very casual manner, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it ever since he told me that he is scared that they would file for divorce given the current state of affairs. And I am well aware that it is really foolish of me to even consider the idea of this happening, but the fact of the matter is that I have begun to have the impression that it could be my fault if they ultimately decide to divorce. My overreaction could be due to the fact that they did not plan to make me feel like a burden or anything else. In fact, they probably did not even intend to offend me on the day of the photo shoot, but I took it to heart and took it to heart. It is not certain that I will be extremely upset if my parents decide to get a divorce, regardless of what is going on with me and them at the moment. I honestly do not know what to think, but I do not know for certain that I will be very sad. Despite the fact that I feel like a dumb doormat for even considering these things, I actually can't stop myself since it's just what's going on in my thoughts. I have tried everything I can think of to get it out of my head, but I simply can't seem to get it out of my head. As a result, I am here because I get the impression that I require comfort at the moment, and there is no better site than Reddit to look for an opinion that is impartial and trustworthy than here. So, AITA, you are upset that my parents did not want me to be included in the family photo that was going to be used for our Christmas greeting, and you are also upset because you told your grandma about it. Edit. Okay, so just to clear up a couple of things, my grandmother revised her will and left everything to me and Nathan, because our parents had made a mistake, but Nathan had not. This explains why my grandmother gave everything to me and Nathan. It is true that the manner in which he had been acting toward me had not exactly been pleasant, but it is important to remember that he is simply a child, just like I am. He is not even close to being 18 years old, and I believe that he should be given the opportunity to make amends for his actions. My grandma and I are of the opinion that he does not deserve to be punished and isolated by his family as a result of the actions that our parents took. When we behave in the same manner, there is so little difference between us and my parents that it is laughable. As a result, I believe that it was not only appropriate but also reasonable for my grandmother to include Nathan in the will. When it comes to those who were inquiring about his biological parents, his mother was approximately 19 years old when she gave birth to him. As a result of this, she was forced to withdraw from college, and to add insult to injury, she was also battling with substance misuse. Unfortunately, Nathan's father disappeared from his life a few months after he was born and only returned to it on a sporadic basis at various points in time. Because my parents attended the same college, they were able to learn about Nathan through their acquaintance with the cousin of Nathan's original mother. This is how my parents learned about Nathan. Despite the fact that Nathan's maternal grandparents had given their daughter multiple opportunities to improve her behavior and become a better mother to him, she was unable to abide by their expectations. Therefore, when Nathan turned 6 years old, his grandparents made the decision to persuade their daughter to give him up for adoption. They reasoned that not only was she hurting her own life, but she was also ruining his possibilities for the future. And it just so happened that my parents had been considering adopting a second child because they desired to have another child. However, my mother's first pregnancy had been quite difficult, and she did not want to incur the danger of having another child. Following a conversation between my parents and Nathan's aunt, my parents decided to foster Nathan for a period of time before formally adopting him. Both of his grandparents have maintained communication with him. He sees them on a monthly basis. But he has never come face to face with his biological parents since he was adopted. On the other hand, his mother asserts that it is difficult for her to see him once more. At the same time, his father has suddenly vanished from his life completely. Since that time, he has been my brother the entire time. It has not been the subject of any discussion. It's possible that I brought up the fact that he was adopted, and I actually feel a little bit of remorse about doing so. Although I should not have done that. I was just so frustrated that I did it anyhow. In addition, I kind of lost my train of thought in the heat of the moment, but I have since apologized to him for losing my train of thought, and because I genuinely don't want to lose him, we are working extremely hard to be back on good terms with each other. We were separated from one another for a few years due to the fact that our parents were involved, but we are not going to let that happen again. In fact, I have even informed him that he is more than welcome to come live with me and our grandma in the event that things get too difficult for him to handle back at home as a result of the amount of conflict that is occurring between our parents. Hello, and thank you so much for all of the comments. This is the first update. I cannot express how grateful I am for all of the support that people like you have provided me. As much as it has been hard for me to cope with it, it has helped me feel better too. Know that there have been a lot of people who have been in a similar kind of position since. Prior to this, I was feeling like I was all by myself. Nevertheless, the fact that you guys have survived is a source of inspiration for me. I responded to the recommendation that the majority of you had made, and I talked to my grandma about how I was feeling like I was responsible for the fights that occurred between my parents. Also, she, along with everyone else, informed me that there was no reason for me to feel sorry for myself. Once and for all, I had decided to speak out for myself. In spite of the fact that I had put up with their mistreatment for years, there was nothing wrong with that course of action. In order to convince them of the value that I possessed, I had done virtually everything that was within my power. In spite of the fact that I had put up with them for a considerable amount of time and made an effort to integrate myself into their family, they continued to reject me and push me away on multiple occasions. As a result of the fact that they did not have anyone but themselves to blame, they had instead turned against one another. Because I am not to blame for that, there is no reason for me to be so hard on myself about it. I suppose that is correct as well. Due to the fact that my parents do not have anyone else in the family to blame at the moment, they do not wish to take their frustrations out on Nathan. What this means is that they are venting all of their rage and fury on one another. It will be a really sad event if they decide to divorce, but it is not going to be my problem if they do so. Moreover, it is still in their best interest if they want to remain an item together. No matter what arises, I'm not going to get involved in it. Nathan and I have had a conversation about this matter, and he informed me that he had merely informed me about what was going on at home because I had inquired about it. On the other hand, he had no intention of ever making me feel terrible about it, and I am aware of that. I just wanted him to know that he may come live with me if he wants to, since I know that he might wind up hating himself as well. I told him that it was not his fault either, but I wanted him to know that he could come live with me if he wanted to, and I will not allow it to happen to him. He assured me that he would give it some thought, but at the moment he would find it best to remain with our parents because he still owes them a significant amount of money. Moreover, I can see where he is coming from, to a certain extent. So I do not harbor any ill will toward him. It is a commitment that we have made to one another that we will not allow the rest of the family to cause us to turn against one another, regardless of what happens with the rest of the family. In addition, I have high hopes that we will be able to maintain that commitment. Greetings and thank you for your time. Today my parents came to see me. After I had finished my schoolwork and returned home, I found them seated in the living room with my grandma. I was informed by her as soon as I stepped in that they were there to have a conversation with me. Although I had a really bad day at school as well, I was in no desire to talk to them because I was in a negative attitude. As a result, I informed them that whatever it was that they wanted to say, they could either send it to me by email or they could come over at a later time because I was quite fatigued and I simply needed to take a sleep. On the other hand, they informed me that they had taken time off from their jobs in order to talk to me because they wanted to bring me back with them. My departure for college was scheduled to take place in a couple of months. In other words, they desired to spend the final few months before I departed with me. In the event that I had been upset by their behavior, they stated that they were come to offer their apologies. At this point, some may argue that I have been being overly critical, but I find the manner that they stated it to be really offensive. Considering that I was insulted by their behavior, what does it even mean to state that they were sorry for my emotional distress? Because of the insulting nature of their behavior, I was able to be offended. I was aware that I had been having self-doubt for a few days, but this is no longer the case because the circumstances had changed. I have no doubt that everyone is in agreement that the actions they took and the manner in which they dealt with me were wrong. Consequently, I explained to them that the only reason I had been so unhappy was because the manner in which they had treated me was totally inappropriate. I felt insulted because what they had done was insulting, and there was no possibility of a situation emerging in which they would not have done it. However, rather of taking that as a given and making the necessary adjustments, they informed me that even I had been much further away from them than they had been. Thus, it is not surprising that they were unaware of what I was going through. It simply opened my eyes to the fact that my parents were beyond apologizing, regardless of how hard I tried or how hard anyone else attempted to apologize for them. I knew that they were just going to try to gaslight me more into believing that this was all my responsibility, and eventually would get me to apologize to them instead. Because of this, I told them to leave, because I knew that they were going to try to do that. As a result of my desire to avoid unnecessary trouble, I simply requested that they go. On the other hand, they refused to even get up and stated that they would not go until I had sat down and made the conversation more respectful, since they are entitled to at least that. They also stated that they would not leave until I had done so, particularly after everything that they had done for me, which consisted of nothing more than the typical things that every parent always does. I could not even bring myself to protest. Just as I was about to return to my room, my father yelled at me and told me that I was not permitted to go without first having a conversation with them. I simply rolled my eyes and went to depart. To my great relief, my grandmother was present at the time. Moreover, she was not going to tolerate behavior of this nature within the confines of her home. As a result, she instructed my father to keep his mouth shut and his voice quiet since, after the manner in which he had treated me, he had no right to yell at me simply because I had taken the decision that was best for me and left them. She gave my father the instruction to apologize to me and told him that there was nothing she could do if I did not want to speak to him since they had to leave. She also told him that they had to depart, mostly due to the fact that she was not going to give them permission to continue to mentally torment me, simply because they were concerned about their reputation and their image on the internet. It was evident that they were only here to get me back with them because they were concerned about what people would think if they found out that I had moved out and was living with my grandmother. The other hand, I didn't care because I was responsible for my own future. Despite the fact that my parents made another attempt to communicate with me, I simply urged them to leave me alone because everything was still too new and I was not going to move on anytime soon. As a result, they were eventually forced to go because my grandmother was not going to permit them to remain for a further period of time. She asked me whether I wanted to see them again after they had departed, and I informed her that there would be a period of time during which I would not be able to do so. So the next time they make an attempt to come, they will. They are not going to be invited inside by my grandmother. When I asked Nathan about their visit, he informed me that he was unaware of it and that they had only returned home a few hours earlier. I also asked him what its significance. They appeared to be very dissatisfied, and none had even ventured out of their rooms in a considerable amount of time. Although I can't help but feel sorry for him, I can't help but accept the fact that things are the way they are. The third update. Hello everyone. Now that I've been accepted to the college of my choosing, I'm incredibly excited about the future that lies ahead of me. I'll be departing for college in a week. It is going to be a really challenging endeavor. Despite the fact that I will be living on my own, my grandmother has finished making all of the necessary preparations before the move, and she is going to stay with me and assist me in settling into my apartment for the first couple of weeks. For the past few months, my parents and I have not communicated with one another. During this time, my mental health has significantly improved, and I no longer experience frequent episodes of emotional breakdowns during the day. It would appear that abstaining from their company has proven to be beneficial. This makes me feel a bit awful. But I'm happy for Nathan, because he told me that things have pretty much returned to normal in the family, and I think they are also not much worse off without me. But despite this, I'm delighted for Nathan. There is no doubt that we have maintained communication, and we are going to make an effort to participate in FaceTime at least once every week. Even though I'm going to miss my life here, I'm looking forward to what lies ahead. Thank you for making sure I'm doing well.